What is the imperial oath in Japan?
The following oath is taken from the 1889 Constitution of the Empire of Japan. It was spoken by the Emperor in the sanctuary of the Imperial Palace. We, the successor to the prosperous throne of our predecessors, do humbly and solemnly swear to the imperial founder of our house, and to our other imperial ancestors that, in pursuance of a great policy coextensive with the heavens and with the earth, we shall maintain and secure from decline the ancient form of government. In consideration of the progressive tendency of the course of human affairs and in parallel with the advance of civilization, we deem it expedient, in order to give clearness and distinctness to the instructions bequeathed by the imperial founder of our house and by our other imperial ancestors, to establish fundamental laws formulated into express provisions of law, so that, on the one hand, our imperial posterity may possess an express guide for the course they are to follow, and that, on the other, our subjects shall thereby be enabled to enjoy a wider range of action in giving us their support, and that the observance of our laws shall continue to the remotest ages of time. We will thereby give greater firmness to the stability of our country, and promote the welfare of all the people within the boundaries of our dominions. And we now establish the imperial house law and the constitution. These laws come to only an exposition of grand precepts for the conduct of the government, bequeathed by the imperial founder of our house and by our other imperial ancestors, that we have been so fortunate in our reign, in keeping with the tendency of the times, as to accomplish this work. We owe to the glorious spirits of the imperial founder of our house and of our other imperial ancestors. We now reverently make our prayer to them and to our illustrious father, and implore the help of their sacred spirits, and make to them solemn oath never at this time nor in the future to fail to be an example to our subjects in the observance of the laws hereby established. May the heavenly spirits witness this our solemn oath.
How does the agricultural cycle affect Shinto-related ritual celebrations?
Many festivities are still tied to various agricultural occasions. Spring and autumn festivals correspond with planting and harvesting. A large cluster of so-called spring festivals, Harumatsuri, covers events that run generally from January to May, though some areas stretch the season into July. In late March or April people celebrate Cherry Blossom Festival, one of nature's sublime but fleeting glories. On May 5th, 5th of the 5th in some places, other days elsewhere, many people observe a special rice planting day. Two of Kyoto's larger shrines, Kamigamo and Shimogamo in the north of the city, celebrate a prayer for good harvest called Hollyhock Festival, Aoi-matsuri, complete with elaborate processions and reenactments of ancient imperial events. With countless regional variations, the planting, or transplanting, Rites occur generally during May, June, and July, stretching well into the summer season. This seasonal overlap is a result of using more than one system for converting special occasions from the lunar to the solar calendar. Some shrines host enormous gatherings centered around processions and contests of various kinds. Autumn festivals, Aki-matsuri, include a similar grouping of celebrations that begin even before the summer festival season has ended and extend into October. At the beginning of each imperial era, the new emperor performs an autumn celebration called the Great Feast of New Food. Daijasai, offering rice to the sun goddess and imperial forebears. Whether in the imperial palace or at local shrines, these are all occasions for gratitude to the kami for bountiful harvest. Between planting and harvest are a host of generally smaller summer festivals. Natsumatsuri, during which people pray for a healthy crop. Some shrines, however, still host major celebrations during July, August, and September. Many of these are occasions for teams of younger men and boys especially to engage in spirited competition, vying to get their mikoshi along the procession route faster and arrive at the shrine first. Winter festivals. Fuyu no Matsuri, revolve largely around preparations for the end of the year and New Year's celebrations, shogesu. Calculated on the solar calendar, the winter solstice heralds the new year. So many people begin them with ceremonial cleaning and wrap up the old year by laying old sewing needles to rest at a local shrine. Honor for all things that contribute to human civilization, not for human beings alone that have come to the end of their lives, is essential. 7 days during a period called the Great Cold, Daikon, generally between January 6 and 21st, retain some of their ancient associations. People gather at shrines to enjoy the return of the sun in lengthening days that portend spring, and to pray for good fortune in general.
Is exorcism important in Shinto practice?
Demons and assorted evil influences miss no opportunity to make nuisances of themselves, especially at times when human beings and natural processes are most vulnerable. Beginnings, such as planting time or the birth of an infant, can be particularly difficult in this respect. Shinto tradition includes various understandings of how evil forces work and several methods for contending with them. Most undesirable forces are associated with impurity and pollution. Some evil spirits will depart in a ritual that designates as a scapegoat any animal or object capable of taking on the negative forces. Emperors of old rubbed a human effigy over their bodies, leaving all personal impurity on the image, which officials of the Bureau of Yin and Yang then ritually consigned to a river. Other rituals use a weapon such as a sword to attack the evil power as though it were a physical presence. Some rituals assume the evil forces have taken on demonic bodies and must be pursued and expelled from a locality. In one rite, people throw soybeans in unlucky directions and command the demons to depart. An important part of the spring sets up on season change. Matsuri. Some large festivals are entirely dedicated to a type of communal exorcism. An originally Buddhist rite called Goryeo, meeting with august spirits, has been associated with Kyoto's famous Jun Matsuri, for example. That festival arose out of a need to banish the spirits of disease, and eventually grew into a full-scale Shinto celebration. Another important interpretation of spirit possession has been traditionally associated with the belief that the fox is capable of changing shapes. Extraordinary spiritual states were therefore sometimes explained as a type of fox possession. Some popular traditions identify various psychosomatic illnesses as forms of possession. Soul pacification, tamashizume, is a kind of reverse exorcism in which ritualists seek to make a spirit content to remain in the body of a person suffering from illness.
Are there other distinctive Shinto rites of passage or initiation?
Several types of ceremony and celebration are associated with various stages in life. Tradition recommends that parents, formerly the grandmother, since mothers remained impure for a time after childbirth, bring 32-day-old boys or 33-day-old girls to the shrine for a special blessing. This first shrine visit, Hatsumiya Meiri, functioned as the infant's initiation into the Shinto shrine community. Older children also have their days. Each November 15th, a festival called Shishigo-sen 753, marks a rite of passage for both boys and girls. 3 and 7-year-old girls and 5-year-old boys don their fanciest dress-up outfits for a shrine visit to pray for a safe and happy future. Putting on special clothes is a major ingredient in rites of initiation. Young people reach the age of adulthood at 20. On Coming of Age Day, see Jinohai, January 15 each year. Young adults, especially women, visit shrines in formal attire for a blessing. Other coming-of-age observances identify manhood with age 17 and womanhood with 19. Acknowledging the difficulty of life's changes with the bestowal of protective talismans. Many older Japanese still observe rites of passage that acknowledge the challenges of aging. They may visit shrines when they reach the ages of 61, 70, 77, 88, and 99. To ask for protection and blessings.
Are there Shinto rituals of marriage?
Weddings in Japan have traditionally followed Shinto ritual, and the vast majority still include Shinto elements even when performed in connection with other traditions, such as Christianity. Until recent times, however, weddings occurred in homes and were performed by laypersons only. Since the mid-19th century, shrine nuptials performed by Shinto priests have been more common. A ceremony called shinzenkeken, nuptials in the presence of kami, may take place in a wedding hall on shrine grounds or in other public spaces. According to some, a marriage deity called Musubi no Kami, the god who ties the knot, is a Japanese counterpart to the moon-dwelling deist, Yulao, who bound together the feet of marriage partners. Many Japanese continue the ancient practice of arranged marriage, and some young couples still live with the groom's family, following Confucian traditions. At the heart of the wedding ceremony is a shared drink of sake, rice wine. Many Japanese families still value elaborate ritual as a form of social communication. And some will even have two ceremonies, one Shinto and one Christian, for example. Deist-influenced traditions still recommend that couples be wed only on days determined to be auspicious.
Does the form of ritual suicide called harakiri or seppuku have Shinto connections?
Ritual suicide has sometimes been associated with Shinto by way of the samurai code of honor. The principle behind taking one's life has been that one can be cleansed of shame incurred through bad judgment or ill will by means of suicide. Harakiri means literally belly cutting, a grim ritual in which the subject disembowels himself with a short blade while kneeling. His second then dispatches the subject by decapitating him with the longer samurai sword. There have been few publicized instances of the ritual, also called by the preferred and more polite term seppuku, in recent times. Surely the most famous such act was that of celebrated novelist Yukio Mishima. In 1970, most people no longer consider ritual suicide in any way laudable or virtuous and certainly do not think of it as part of Shinto religious belief.
How do Shinto practitioners celebrate birth?
Not long after a couple have a baby, traditionally about 30 days, they take the child to the shrine for a natal blessing. This is consistent with the belief that all new ventures and beginnings will fare better if brought before the kami. In addition, the symbolism includes the belief that the infant thus becomes a child of the family's protector kami. Parents arrange with shrine staff for a standard ceremony that takes place inside the haten, or outer worship hall. At larger shrines, a senior priest, assistant priest, and miko typically perform the ceremony, pronouncing solemn prayers in an archaic Japanese. The priests then perform blessings over the young family by waving the harigushi. The miko may also participate by blessing the worshippers with a green sakeke branch. Ancient Shinto tradition retains a class of divine beings called kami of birth or beginnings, Musubi no Kami. They include kami of fire, youth, plenty, and the creator divinities who brought all things to birth.
What are some of the main varieties of Shinto officials or specialists?
Shinto tradition refers to the priesthood in general as either Shinshoku or Kanishi. Larger shrines with full priestly staffs distinguish among a number of ranks. The chief priest is called the Guji, generally the highest-ranking local official. Guji might have oversight of up to 30 subordinate shrines. The Gonguji is second in command and oversees a staff of several lower ranks as well, including junior assistant chief priests, Shingonguji. Senior priests are called Neki, assistant senior priests Gonneki, and regular priests Shutten or Kyujo, fill out the ranks of male staff. A national ranking system also distinguishes among priests by acknowledging their levels of learning with the equivalent of academic degrees, named purity, Jokai, brightness, Maikai, righteousness, Sekai, and uprightness, Chakai. Young unmarried women, called shrine maidens, Maiko, function rather like deaconesses. Dressed in striking vermilion skirts and white blouses. They assist in blessing rituals, run the shrine shop, and perform sacred dance. Maiko traditionally begin their association with the shrine and training for service as sacred children. Highest in rank is the unique position called Saishu, found only at the Ise shrine and held by a woman. She is an imperial princess with the symbolic title Master of the Matsuri, festivals. Assisting her is a priest with the rank of Daiguji, Great Chief Priest, a function unique to Ise. In the imperial household, ritual specialists have either of two ranks. The Shoten parallels the shrine rank of senior priest. The Shotenho that of assistant senior priest. But the emperor himself or a personal delegate presides. Much as the Chinese sovereign once did, at over 24 annual ceremonies.
Does the sport of sumo wrestling have any Shinto connections?
Japan's ancient and still wildly popular sport of sumo wrestling is not itself a religious ritual. But it has surrounded itself with rituals associated with Shinto tradition. Once, these matches occurred on shrine grounds as part of the larger category of activities called divine entertainment. Today the bigger matches take place in specially decked out arenas and are scheduled in fortnightly tournaments at set times of the year. Action occurs under a shrine-like roof suspended high above the floor. Two enormous wrestlers, the heavier the better, in general confront each other in a raised circle of well-tamped earth bounded by the heavy braided ceremonial rope called the shiminawa. As they enter the ring, the giants sprinkle handfuls of salt to purify the space. They squat and spread their arms in an ancient samurai gesture, designed to assure opponents that they carry no weapons. A referee dressed in ancient ceremonial garb signals the beginning and end of a match and declares a winner, using deliberate, archaic gestures. Sumo champions are among Japan's highest paid and most popular athletes. The best of them do countless product endorsements and parades of sumo greats led Olympians into the arena when Japan hosted the Games at Nagano in 1998. Complex as the phenomenon has become in Japanese society today. Sumo has its roots in the same simplicity and basic feeling for nature that pervades so much of Shinto tradition.
How are Shinto leaders chosen and given authority?
Shinto priesthood has historically been a hereditary occupation. Even after the government officially took over the appointment of chief priests after 1868. Hereditary succession continued in many localities. Perhaps the most important ingredients in maintaining standards among Shinto officials are the two educational institutions now solely responsible for the training of priests. Tokyo's Kokyugakuin, National Learning University is a relatively recent development. A private university that offers general education as well as the equivalent of Shinto seminary curriculum. It supplies research for the present centralized shrine authority, the Jinjiya Honcho. The Kagaken, Imperial Hall of Learning, University near Ise was originally a public institution that closed after World War II and then reopened in 1952 as a private university. Priests to be study Japanese history and literature, but focus on Shinto studies, especially ritual and theology. Shinto priests are not ordained clergy, strictly speaking. They are laypersons granted certification or licensure upon satisfactory completion of the seminary curriculum and its qualifying exams.
How does the hierarchy among Shinto shrines work?
Over the centuries, Shinto authorities have devised a number of structures and classifications by which to distinguish various levels and functions of shrines. The most important is called the shrine rank system, Sheikakusaido. That has been in place since shortly after the Meiji Restoration of 1868. Jingu designates shrines of top rank under imperial auspices, such as Meiji Jingu, in Tokyo, which enshrines royal ancestors, and Ise Jingu, which is at the top of the hierarchy and is called the Daijingu, Grand Imperial Shrine. Next in rank are the approximately 100,000 Jinjiya, a generic term including virtually all shrines larger than little wayside structures. About 250 are included on a special list of highest-ranking ones. Of these, some 200 were designated prior to World War II as governmental shrines, Kansha. Many larger Jinjiya have spawned affiliated or branched shrines called Buncha. Multiple shrines dedicated to a single kami generally constitute distinct families, with one shrine usually acknowledged as the original foundation from which branched shrines developed. Some very important jinjia, such as Kajiga in Nara and about a dozen others, have the honorific title Taisha, Grand Shrine, roughly equivalent to Cathedral Basilica. They are also part of a cluster of 22, Niju Nisha, institutions elevated to special status. But even they are divided into 3 levels, 7 high, 7 middle ranking, and 8 lower. That grouping arose out of the practice of ranking shrines within a given region according to their order of priority on pilgrimage routes, or to guide devotees intent on visiting a sequence of holy places. In various prefectures, a further ranking of area shrines simply lists them as first, second, or third shrine, acknowledging the 3 regional shrines that draw the largest crowds of worshippers. A number of jinjia, some count 138, have been specially designated as nation-protecting shrines. Gokoku Jinjia, because of their dedication to the souls of those who died in battle. 27 shrines within that category, also called deceased spirit invoking shrines. Shokansha, have been accorded a special rank because of the importance of the heroes from all periods of Japanese history that they commemorate. Tokyo's Yasukuni Jinjia ranks at the top of that category. Before 1945, countless smaller local memorials represented the bottom of this hierarchical category. The main central administration is called the Association of Shinto Shrines. Jinjia Honcho, which has branches, called Jinjia-cho, in each Japanese prefecture.
Have there been any Shinto mystics?
Mainstream Shinto tradition has not been particularly noted for producing important mystical figures. That is not to say that there have been no Shinto mystics. But talk of mystical union with the divine has come more from various syncretistic schools and sects, especially those heavily influenced by non-Japanese schools of religious thought. Kurozumai Muntada, founder of the Kurozumai sect with a distinctively Neo-Confucian tilt, taught the importance of the deliberate quest to become a kami. He himself is said to have experienced oneness with the sun goddess Amaterasu when she suffused his body.
Are there any Shinto divination rituals?
Bokusan is the Japanese term for the complex process of divining auspicious times for agriculturalists. Divination encompasses a variety of specific devices. As in Chinese community traditions, people often draw lots, the Chinese shake bundles of numbered sticks and pull the one left protruding, and Shinto worshippers draw numbered bits of paper. Sometimes they will read the angle at which an arrow sticks in its target, or read the designs on a turtle shell, or hold a deer's shoulder blade in a flame and observe how it cracks. A similar ritual uses arrows for slightly different purposes. People purchase white arrows at shrine shops, especially around the New Year, and use them as amulets, protective devices, at home throughout the year. Divination is required for setting the dates for many major festivals. Ritual leaders invite certain divinatory kami to be in attendance. As the diviner kindles a sacred fire on which to heat a turtle shell. Specialists then read the relationship of the cracks to lines and characters pre-drawn on the shell. A ritual cousin of Chinese Feng Shui is called Casso. It involves a set of geomantic calculations to establish optimal conditions for all sorts of human habitations. Another type of divination has worshippers write on small pieces of paper their various options as they prepare to make a major decision. In what may be a variation on a contemporary popular Chinese practice, people typically pull a stick from a bundle, read its number, and take a piece of pre-written advice from a correspondingly numbered drawer. Numerous Shinto shrines provide racks where people who find the advice unpalatable can tie their paper to be rid of the effects of the bad news.
How do Shinto practitioners deal ritually with death and mourning?
According to a saying, Shinto marries, Buddhism buries. During the Tokugawa era, 1600 to 1868, an imperial decree stipulated that only Buddhist priests should conduct funeral rites. Most cemeteries in Japan are connected to Buddhist temples rather than Shinto shrines. But there are exceptions to that general rule. And practitioners of Shinto have important beliefs and rituals concerning death and mourning. A major difference between Buddhist and Shinto practices is that Shinto rites never occur in shrines. 4 shrines are strictly dedicated to the kami. Shinto tradition regards death as a form of evil and a serious source of pollution. Shinto belief and practice has been profoundly influenced by certain Confucian attitudes toward departed ancestors. And large numbers of Japanese still perform rites of ancestor veneration. Some Japanese families still follow the practice of enshrining a deceased person's symbols in a spirit house. Tamaya, placed beneath the home's kamidana, 7 weeks after a funeral. Some of Japan's largest shrines are dedicated to memorializing the spirits of great human beings elevated to the status of kami. Grief, kibyaku, is associated with a prescribed period during which the experience of death renders family members impure. The bereaved family should stay away from shrines and refrain from Shinto ritual generally during that interval. In pre-Buddhist times, the Japanese sometimes constructed monumental memorials to the dead. Historically, lay people performed Shinto funeral rituals, with main participants wearing white. Today, Shinto rites, led by priests, occur in homes or funeral establishments. Some shrines continue to perform memorial rites for those who have died in battle.
Is there a regular, standard Shinto group liturgical worship?
Communal worship is not a regular feature of Shinto liturgical practice. People may arrive at a shrine in large numbers, but they generally do not gather to worship as a large congregation. Individual and small group worship is the norm, whether for brief impromptu visits made outside the shrine or for more elaborate priestly rituals in the worship hall. A distinctive feature of Shinto architecture is the absence of worship spaces large enough to accommodate sizable congregations. By contrast, the bigger Japanese Buddhist temples accommodate sizable groups in a single worship space. Even in larger Shinto shrines, the parts of the worship facility open to the public are in any case not fully enclosed. Being very much at the mercy of cold weather is the price of wanting a sacred space to be as much in tune with nature as possible. This also reflects the underlying sense that people build community through other activities, but perform their most intimate spiritual duties as individuals or families.
Have women exercised leadership among Shinto practitioners?
In ancient times, women played an indispensable role as shamans in countless Shinto shrines. Even after imperial decrees reduced women's roles in shrine life, giving precedence to a male priesthood, women continued to fill some key positions. Well into the 16th century, for example, women functioned as priestesses in some shrines. The last of the priestesses was a young woman serving the Suwa shrine in Nagasaki. Women have long acted as spirit mediums consulted by many a priest over the centuries, as well as by individual worshippers. Restrictive legislation arising from the Meiji Restoration in 1868 dramatically curtailed women's official participation in shrine staff ministries. Only at the Ise Grand Shrine, sacred to the sun goddess Amaterasu, does a woman currently hold the position of high priestess. During the Second World War, many women took over priestly functions when their husbands departed for military service.
Is there a Shinto system of religious law?
Here have been numerous bodies of legislation concerning the structure and administration of the Shinto shrine system, and about governmental controls over the spread of religious organizations in Japan generally. Laws have decreed relationships between imperial rule and religion, and between Shinto and Buddhism, and others have stipulated conditions for religious liberty. But there has never been the kind of comprehensive codification of religious law that one finds in Islam's Sharia, Judaism's rabbinical law, or Roman Catholicism's canon law. Virtually everything related to the regulation of conduct in Shinto tradition has been integrated into an all-encompassing and very demanding, but mostly unwritten, code of ethics. People learn what is expected of them religiously through family and local community tradition.
Are apostles the same as disciples?
An apostle is literally one who is sent out, from the Greek apostolos. Readers may associate the term mostly with Jesus' early community of 12 elect followers. But Muslim tradition also uses it to refer to an important subcategory of the group known as prophets. Apostles, Muzalan in Arabic, are those special prophets who are given a scripture and a mission to all peoples. The other prophets are sent to a specific people only and do not bring a distinct sacred book. Disciples are literally those who learn from a master. Christian tradition numbers Jesus formally commissioned disciples at 70. According to Buddhist tradition, the Buddha gathered 500 primary disciples around himself, with a handful of them eventually gaining special recognition for expertise in one or another aspect of Buddhist teaching.
Are there any signs or symbols that might identify an individual as a Confucian?
Confucian tradition consists far more of actions and the preservation of proper relationships than on the expression of specific doctrines. The tradition so pervades Chinese and other Asian cultures that it is like the air one breathes, rather than a distinct set of beliefs. As a result, it is virtually impossible to tell who among Chinese, Japanese, or Koreans think of themselves as Confucians. There are still some people who identify themselves as disciples of the Master, but they are relatively few in number. Since so many rituals that Chinese and other East Asians perform are common to members of various religious traditions, the fact that an individual practiced ancestor veneration, for example, offers no clues in this regard. There are, however, a number of symbols connected with daily life originally associated with Confucius that still appear in popular arts of Asia. The so-called four treasures of the literary apartment, for example, include an ink stick, ink block, brush, and paper.
What were some critical events in Islam's earliest years?
Over the next 23 years or so, Muhammad continued to preach the word God had spoken directly to him. At the heart of the message was the notion of surrender. The root meaning of the Arabic word Islam, pronounced Islam, to the one true God. His early preaching called for social justice and equality and condemned oppression of the poor by the wealthy and powerful. Muhammad belonged to a powerful tribe called the Quraysh, who exercised considerable control over the lives of the Meccans generally. But Muhammad's family and the clan of which they were a part were among the poorer and less influential within the tribe. Muhammad's preaching did not endear him to the Quraysh, who made life difficult for the small community of Muslims. In 622, Muhammad and his followers made the crucial decision to move north to the city of Yathrib, whose representatives had offered the young community sanctuary. This emigration or hijra marked the official beginning of the Muslim calendar. Muhammad the Prophet became a statesman as well, and Yathrib became known as Madinat an-Nabi, the city of the Prophet, or Medina for short. The Muslim community grew rapidly, doing battle with the Meccans and eventually regaining access to Mecca in 630.
Is there any difference between meditation and contemplation?
Meditation and contemplation are important practices in many religious traditions. The two terms are often used synonymously to refer to a prayerful focus on inner spiritual realities. There are, however, some important differences in the methods used for that focusing. It is helpful to keep in mind that there are variations in both theory and practice among the major religious traditions. In general, meditation involves a non-discursive concentration on some object, either verbal or visual. The idea is not to engage in thinking about the object of focus, but merely to allow it to function as a kind of controlled distraction. By targeting the focal object exclusively, the meditator frees up the mind and spirit to achieve a deeper level of simple awareness. Many traditions follow the practice of having a preceptor or spiritual guide assign a specific symbol to each meditator. That symbol can be a word or a phrase, sometimes called a mantra, repeated slowly and deliberately. It can also be an object upon which the meditator concentrates visually, such as a candle flame or a flower. When a meditator becomes aware that the mind is wandering, the solution is to observe "my mind is wandering" or something similar, and return to concentration. Gradually the number and intensity of distractions dwindle. Some traditions allow that there is important intellectual content in meditation, such as a point of doctrine on which the meditator reflects for deeper insight. Contemplation involves a different method. Here the immediate goal is to enter imaginatively into a spiritual reality, and ultimately to be united with that reality. As its Latin root words suggest, the contemplator seeks to become one with or abide in a sacred place, come, with, and templum, temple. Some traditions hold that contemplation is a state of pure intuition beyond any mental content. Others include in their understanding of contemplation the active imaginative entry into an important scene, as if the contemplator were there with the players in some sacred action. Whatever the precise definition or method used in a particular tradition, it is fair to suggest that meditation precedes and prepares for contemplation.
Who are Sunni Muslims?
About 85 to 90% of the world's Muslims consider themselves Sunni. Their historic patrimony derives directly from the Prophet himself as institutionalized in the Caliphate. Sunni tradition has been embodied in most of the regimes that have held political power from Morocco to Indonesia. Since the early Middle Ages until early modern times. The ideal of the Caliph, legitimate successor to Muhammad, as the spiritual as well as temporal ruler of all Muslims, has survived largely as a distant dream since the Mongols destroyed Baghdad in 1258. And since the last Ottoman Sultan fell from power in the 1920s. Virtually no Muslim ruler has been even nominally regarded as a universal ruler. Some Muslims still entertain the possibility of a resurgence of the Caliphate. But that is definitely a minority view.
Do Christian communities run private schools for their children?
Private or parochial education continues to be a concern for many Christians. In addition to the thousands of Catholic schools attached to parishes in the United States. For example, other denominations maintain hundreds of schools and Christian academies throughout the country. By far the most numerous are primary schools, but secondary schools and colleges also offer the possibility of more advanced learning in a Christian setting. The majority of non-state institutions of higher education in the United States historically have been founded in connection with religious traditions. For various reasons, including difficulty in securing government funding. Large numbers of them no longer retain their original religious affiliation. A notable exception are the clusters of Catholic high schools, colleges, and universities that still identify themselves with that religious sponsorship.
Are there any signs or symbols that might identify an individual as a Buddhist?
In most parts of the world in which Buddhism remains an important presence, it is a safe bet that many people on the street have had some direct contact with Buddhist tradition. But it is usually difficult to tell Buddhists from non-Buddhists merely by looking at their clothing or other personal effects. Occasionally you will spot an item of jewelry whose symbolism is more or less explicitly Buddhist. The eight-spoked wheel of Dharma is a common symbol easily reproduced on small-scale items. Buddhist pilgrims, however, often stand out because of the traditional garb and variety of symbols they wear. In Japan, for example, some pilgrims wear a large, round, pointed, or bowl-like straw hat, carry pilgrim staffs, and wear around their necks a small cloth wallet, in which to collect the souvenir stamps they receive from each temple they visit. Monks, nuns, and priests are surely the most obvious examples here of distinctive signs. Nearly everywhere in the world, monks and nuns shave their heads. They typically wear a distinctive habit or garb, consisting of 2 or 3 wraps, 2 for novices, 3 for senior monks and nuns. One wrap covers the lower body, another the upper. For religious rituals, monks wear a long cloth of 12 folds, sometimes called the stole, over the left shoulder. Colors vary according to region and institutional affiliation. From one branch of the monastic order or Buddhist lineage to another. Saffron is the most common color for monastic garb, but, for example, Tibetan monks often wear a dark burgundy, Japanese monks typically don darker shades of gray, brown, and violet, and Chinese nuns often wear a simple gray robe.
Are there any important links between the Quran and the Bible?
Since the Islamic interpretation of history overlaps in significant ways with those of Judaism and Christianity, one should not be surprised to find that some material in the Quran parallels some biblical material. Some narrative treatments of various biblical patriarchs and kings, whom the Quran identifies as prophets and messengers, immediately recall aspects of biblical accounts. But there are also interesting variations in the stories. Adam and Eve's fall, for example, is connected with eating from a forbidden tree, or an ear of wheat in one version. Sprinkled throughout the scripture are references to Abraham's near sacrifice of his son, whom Islamic tradition takes to be Ishmael rather than Isaac, and to Moses' mission to Pharaoh, David's musical gifts, Solomon's royal grandeur, and others. Perhaps the single most important parallel is the story of Joseph. Surah 12 of the Quran retells the tale found in Genesis 39-50 with its own distinctive flavor and variations in detail. Only Joseph's story is told in its entirety, and all in a single surah dedicated entirely to it. Though many Jewish and Christian readers often conclude that Muhammad borrowed from the Bible, that is not necessarily the case. The way the Quran tells the stories, mostly in short excerpts and allusions, suggests that Muhammad's listeners must have been already familiar with at least the general drift of the narratives. There are also some accounts of non-biblical prophetic figures, called Hud, Saleh, and Shu'ab, in some ways unique to the Arabian Peninsula. It is important to note that Muslim tradition has discerned in both the Old and New Testaments references to the coming of Islam's prophet. God promised to raise up for Israel a prophet like Moses, Deuteronomy 18:18, Muhammad. The prophet Isaiah sees two riders approaching, one on a donkey and the other on a camel, Jesus and Muhammad. Jesus promised to send a Parakletos, advocate, John 14:16. But Muslim commentators argue that with the correct vowels, the Greek word is parakletos, meaning highly praised, the exact meaning of Muhammad in Arabic.
What has been the shaman's role in Daoism?
Remnants of ancient shamanism continue to color much deist religious thought and practice. In pre-deist times, shamans were tribal leaders possessed of extraordinary powers. Reports from around the 3rd century BCE describe how these fangshi, or masters of prescriptions, worked their magic. They could tap natural energies, exercise control over life and death, and assume the form of various powerful creatures. Shamanic specialists included many women as well as men. With the dawn of empire and agricultural economy, shamans became part of the governmental structure. Their duties included drawing spiritual powers to themselves as they entered into trance. Exorcism, explaining omens and dreams, influencing the weather for favorable harvest. Curing the sick, and divining heavenly portents at the behest of the emperor. A transformed shamanism lives on in various deist practices that are generally divided among the black hat priests, red turban masters, and spirit mediums. Deist ritual specialists still fend off evil spirits and perform a vestige of the ancient ceremonies symbolizing the shaman's journey to the upper and lower worlds. That spiritual journey of ascent and descent remains perhaps the most distinctive survival of shamanistic lore. It appears in various traditions in surprising forms, including, for example, Muhammad's famous night journey and ascension. Deist ritual symbolism of the journey occurs in the masters pacing the clouds as he prepares the sacred space for the great religious observances.
What is apostasy?
The term apostasy comes from the Greek compound apostasis, literally standing away or apart from. Hence rebellion or secession. It differs from heresy in several important respects. Heresy involves refusal to accept one or more mainstream doctrinal positions. But those holding the heretical views do not necessarily mean to repudiate the religious tradition altogether. In other words, heresy means a kind of selective rejection of religious teachings, often in the sincere belief that a certain view is simply mistaken. Apostasy implies a blanket rejection of a faith tradition, and a return to former views or to another tradition. So, for example, some early Christians reverted to paganism, and some 7th century Bedouin Arabs who had become Muslims rejected Islam when Muhammad died, and fell back on their ancient tribal ways. Official punishments for both apostasy and heretical beliefs have often been severe, including death, and have depended a great deal on the degree to which religious authorities exercised political clout. In the time of Constantine, apostate Christians suffered very harsh forms of banishment and loss of legal rights.
What is an Ayatollah?
Ayatollah is Arabic for sign of God, an honorific title conferred on leading Shiite religious scholars, especially in Iran and Iraq. In traditional Shiite circles, accomplished scholars can attain the rank of Ayatollah by popular acclaim and through the acknowledgement of their peers. Among those of that rank, some are also further distinguished by the title Grand Ayatollah. Of those, in turn, a group of 7 have traditionally been singled out as sources of imitation and are thereby acknowledged as the most influential teachers among Shiite Muslims.
What are the principal historical stages in the evolution of Greater Hinduism?
A stage known as the Vedic period began as early as 4000 BCE. Some Indian scholars push the origins back as much as 3 or 4,000 years before that. Archaeological evidence from Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro point to a highly developed civilization in the Indus River Valley from around 2700 to 1500 BCE. Early texts suggest a religious culture centered on worship of numerous deities associated with forces of nature. Around 2000 BCE, there may have been a major population shift from the northwest of India to the Ganges plain as a result of the drying up of the Sarasvati River, once a prominent feature of the Indus Valley. The Vedic period comes to a close around the time of that shift. The period of the Upanishad scriptures and the Epic Age, from 1500 to 500 BCE, witnessed dramatic changes and the evolution of major new forms of religious expression. During these centuries, the Upanishads developed the speculative approach now known generically as Vedanta, the culmination of the Vedas. For the next millennium or so, 500 BCE to 500 CE, sometimes referred to as the classical period, new post-Vedantic sacred texts, called sutras, shastras, agamas, and earliest Puranas, formed the basis of a number of important schools of thought. From this period, too, came the written epics, the Ramayana and Mahabharata. Between around 500 and 1800 CE, the so-called medieval period, popular devotional theism, based largely on mythic narrative texts called the Puranas, spread across most of India. Beginning with the arrival of the British in the mid-18th century. The modern period extends into the mid-20th century, the declaration of India's independence, and the partition that created East and West Pakistan as separate Muslim states.
Are any other denizens of the upper and lower worlds important religiously?
Several of the major religious traditions have populated every level of their universes with spiritual powers and presences assigned to countless specific tasks. Angels and devils are only the beginning and the most widely known. One of their most important, and unsung, functions is that of guarding the sacred cosmos as a whole as well as individual holy places. Directional guardians hold sway over all of space. beginning with the 4 cardinal directions and the 4 intermediate directions. They occupy the power niches filled by angels in some traditions, but expand the role of guardian considerably. Thousands of temples all over Asia sport multiple images of fierce, no-nonsense bouncers with orders to warn off the unworthy and offer the good-hearted a feeling of protection. Another personification of power are the characters, often styled kings, who rule the various levels of the netherworld. Certain kinds of devils or demons occupy a similar place in some traditions. But the kings project a still larger impression of potency.
Are music and dance important in Christian religious ritual?
Almost all Christian churches make music an important element in worship, and a few engage in various forms of prayer-related movement. In some non-liturgical churches, singing and dancing form the majority of congregational worship, even to the point of having music accompany the preaching. Individual hymns, some lasting 10 to 15 minutes or more, are the largest feature in those cases, punctuated by prayer and testimony from the assembled worshippers. In other words, songs and preaching make up most of the order of service. Liturgical traditions use the hymn form, but also sing set pieces of the liturgical ritual itself. For example, the Holy, Holy, Holy announces the beginning of the Eucharistic prayer, and the Lamb of God is sung just before communion in the Western liturgical tradition. Since the liturgical traditions strive for an atmosphere of greater solemnity, they tend to incorporate dancing less often, and then only of a rather restrained kind. In many non-liturgical churches the expression of feeling is a major component, so that one can expect to find much more animated movement in such settings. More staid and stately liturgical traditions have historically preferred the majestic sonorities of the pipe organ, occasionally joined by brass, woodwinds, or classical strings. In other traditions, piano is the primary instrument, and even small congregations may feature bands with electric guitar and other keyboards, bass, and full drum kit. In most Eastern Christian traditions, however, liturgical services are chanted without any musical accompaniment. Christians communities all over the world naturally make use of distinctive ethnic and local musical styles and instruments.
Why, after Jesus Christ, is Saint Paul considered the most influential teacher in the history of Christianity?
Paul, whose original name was Saul or Shaul, was born in the town of Tarsus, Cilicia, in modern southeastern Turkey, of Jewish parents of the tribe of Benjamin. Both his parents were Roman citizens. It is safe to assume that Paul's earliest language was Koine Greek, the household language of all educated Roman citizens throughout the empire. Paul was sent at an early age to Jerusalem to attend Bible school. Studying with a famous rabbi, Gamaliel, he learned to write in both Greek and Hebrew and became thoroughly versed in the law. It seems certain that Paul studied in Jerusalem during the 3 years of Jesus' public life and that he was present at the time that the Romans crucified Jesus. Paul may even have heard Jesus preach. He certainly must have heard of Jesus and his movement among the people. Apparently, Paul had gained an outstanding reputation as a young rabbinic student because he was authorized to seek out and prosecute members of a new sect who proclaimed that Jesus of Nazareth was the Messiah. Paul apparently made several trips throughout Palestine in search of Christians. On one such trip from Jerusalem to Damascus, about the year 34 CE, Paul underwent a conversion. 4 accounts of Paul's conversion exist: Acts 9:3-19, 22:6-21, 26:12-18, and Galatians 1:12-16.
Does Shinto tradition include pilgrimage?
Pilgrimages of various kinds have long been important to Japanese in connection with both Buddhism and Shinto. Sacred natural objects and shrines are of course the most common goals of Shinto pilgrims. But people do not always make neat distinctions between Buddhist and Shinto sacred sites. What is most significant is that the place has been hallowed by some event or person of great influence in Japanese history, or by natural qualities that betoken beauty and perfection. A distinctive aspect of Japanese pilgrimage is the formation of pilgrimage circuits, junpai, that encompass multiple stops at sacred groves, mountains, caves, waterfalls, shrines or temples, in all imaginable combinations. Most common are circuits of either 33 or 88 sites set up in relatively recent times by railway and other transportation companies. In medieval times there was even talk of 1,000 shrine pilgrimages. Senja-mairi, with multiple visits motivated by desire for greater spiritual merit. Some pilgrims undertake their journeys as acts of asceticism or spiritual discipline. But most seem to regard pilgrimage as an opportunity for reflection and spiritual renewal. A type of pilgrimage to Shinto's most sacred site, the Ise Shrine, has come to be known as the Blessing Visit, Okage-mairi. Another popular pilgrimage circuit leaves by rail from Osaka and takes in sites associated with the 7 gods of good luck, including both Shinto shrines and Buddhist temples. Over 400 traditional pilgrimage routes still attract Japanese Buddhist and Shinto devotees.